Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're going north of the border to Canada. And, things are really interesting up there right now. A new prime minister. Relations with the U.S. are kind of tense. And there's this sense that Canada's at a turning point.
Yeah, real crossroads.
Exactly. And we've got a whole stack of sources here, news articles, opinion pieces, even some insider whispers to help us understand what's going on.
What's fascinating to me is how this isn't just about one guy, replacing another.
Right.
It feels like a whole bunch of internal and external pressures are coming together.
Okay, so let's start with the obvious. Justin Trudeau's out, and Mark Carney, this guy who's never held elected office, he's in line to take over.
Which is pretty wild when you think about it.
I know, right? Our sources say Carney won the Liberal leadership race with almost 86% of the vote. Like over 150,000 Liberal Party members voted.
Yeah, that's not just a win, that's a statement.
It's a huge statement. So what do you make of a victory on that scale?
I think it tells you a lot about how badly people wanted a change.
Within the Liberal Party or in Canada as a whole?
Maybe both.
Yeah.
Trudeau had that whole charismatic thing going on. But there were economic concerns. Some people were uneasy about his immigration policies. And I think there was a sense that he just wasn't handling the whole U.S. situation very well.
Ah, yes, the Trump factor.
Exactly.
Which, let's be honest, is kind of hard to ignore right now. We've got articles here about Trump's tariffs, his, those offhand comments about annexation. Is he really a threat to Canada's sovereignty, or is it just political theater?
I think it's a little both, to be honest. Trump loves to stir things up, right?
Oh, yeah.
And his actions, even if it's just bluster, they create uncertainty, and that makes people nervous.
Especially Canadians, I imagine.
Yeah. But I also think it's created a space for someone like Carney to step in and be like the anti-Trump.
Yeah. That whole disaster manager narrative.
Yeah, exactly.
So can we talk about Carney's background for a sec? Like, why does he seem so perfect for this moment?
Well, it's partly his resume, head of the Bank of Canada and then the Bank of England.
That's a pretty impressive track record.
I mean, the guy has steered two major economies through some seriously rough waters. 2008, Brexit. And he did it all looking totally calm and collected.
Our sources say even people within the Liberal Party felt like Carney was the only one who could stand up to Trump.
Well, there's that quote from his victory speech where he says, "America is not Canada, and Canada never, ever will be part of America in any way, shape, or form."
Yeah, that was a pretty strong statement.
It was. And it makes you think,
Yeah.
right, like how often do you see that kind of tension between the U.S. and Canada?
They're usually pretty friendly.
Exactly. So for a Canadian leader to come out that strong, it shows you just how much things have changed.
So we've got Carney, this former central banker now, stepping into this political arena. It's like a Shakespearean drama. What do you think will be the biggest challenges for him?
Oh, he's never held elected office before, so there's that.
So he's kind of an outsider.
Totally. And Canadian politics, it's all about relationships, deal-making, compromise.
And I imagine he's going to have to prove to Canadians that he gets them.
Oh, yeah. He can't just be some out-of-touch technocrat who swoops in to fix things.
Right. And let's not forget there's Pierre Poilievre, a Conservative Party leader.
Right.
How do you see this whole election shaping up?
Well, from what we're seeing, the Liberals are trying to frame Poilievre as like Trump light.
Trying to tap into that Canadian anxiety about Trump.
Exactly. And it's true. Poilievre has used some populist rhetoric.
But is he really Canada's Trump?
It's too early to say, I think. But it is interesting to see how the Liberals are using the whole Trump thing to their advantage. They're painting Carney as the antidote,
The steady hand Canada needs in this crazy world.
Exactly. And the question is, can Carney live up to that image? Once he's in office, he'll have to make tough calls, compromise on things. Will he still be seen as the savior?
Or just another politician.
Yeah.
So we focused a lot on the disaster manager angle, but there are these hints that Carney's maybe a bit more complex than that. He's spoken out about climate change, ethical markets. What do you make of that?
I think it's fascinating. He's this globalist, product of the financial elite. But he's also got some surprisingly progressive views.
So how do you think those two sides of him will play out in Canadian politics?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
He's this mix of contradictions, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it all unfolds.
So maybe Carney is more than just a disaster manager. Maybe he represents a whole new kind of leader.
Maybe he does. And maybe that's what Canada and the world needs right now.
Well, on that note, let's take a closer look at Carney himself. What do we know about the man behind the image? What's his story?
Now that's where things get really interesting.
I feel like we're just scratching the surface here. It's not just about Carney, right? There's all this stuff going on in Canada.
Right. It's like all this internal pressure is bubbling up.
Okay, so let's dig into that a little. We've got reports here about housing costs, like skyrocketing costs in some Canadian cities. Everyday expenses, too. People are feeling the squeeze.
Yeah, it's like that in a lot of places right now.
Right. But it seems particularly bad in certain parts of Canada. And I wonder if that could hurt the Liberals.
I think it could, because they're often seen as, the party of the urban elite.
So maybe out of touch with the average Canadian.
Maybe.
And then there's this whole natural resource thing. Canada's got tons of resources, right? Oil, gas, timber. But it seems like there's a real tension
Between development and the environment.
Exactly. And where do Indigenous communities fit into all of that?
It's tough. On one hand, Canada could be this huge energy supplier, a global powerhouse, right?
Right.
But there's also this push for a greener economy, and Indigenous communities are demanding more control over their land and resources. It's a lot to balance.
It is. And then there's immigration. Some of our sources point to this backlash against Trudeau's policies. He really ramped up immigration, especially temporary workers.
To fill those labor shortages.
Yeah, but it seems like that's created some anxieties.
About strain on housing, healthcare, that kind of thing.
So is this just growing pains? Or is it something deeper?
Well, I think some pushback is always going to happen when demographics shift that quickly. People worry about their communities changing.
Right.
But it's also about how it's managed. If people feel like they're not being heard.
Like the benefits aren't being shared fairly.
Exactly. That's when things get messy.
So how do all these issues play into the election? What are voters going to care about the most?
I think the economy is going to be huge.
Like pocketbook issues?
Yeah. Poilievre, the conservative leader, he's probably going to hammer away at the affordability issue.
Trying to paint Carney as out of touch.
Right. And he'll probably play up those anxieties about immigration and cultural change, appeal to that make Canada great again sentiment.
So basically taking a page from the populist playbook.
Exactly. Which can be super effective when people are feeling uncertain.
But Carney's got his own strengths, right?
Oh, yeah.
He's got this reputation for being competent. Like he can handle tough situations.
Right.
And then there's the whole standing up to Trump thing.
Exactly. And he can point to his experience managing economic crises.
Right.
He can be the steady hand.
Right, but he's going to have to do more than just talk about his resume, right?
Totally. He has to connect with voters on an emotional level, show them he gets their struggle.
Has to be more than just a disaster manager.
Yeah, he has to show them he can build a better future.
It's a tall order.
It is. But he's got a chance.
Yeah.
If he can pull it off, he could really change the political landscape in Canada.
It's funny, as we're talking about Carney, I keep thinking back to those hints of idealism, like him supporting Greta Thunberg, talking about ethical markets.
Wow.
It suggests that there's more to him than meets the eye.
Oh, hopefully. It's like he's this walking contradiction.
It makes you wonder if those disaster manager skills could actually be what's needed to tackle these huge systemic problems.
That's an interesting thought. Maybe his experience with those financial crises has given him a unique perspective.
Like he's seen firsthand how fragile the system is.
Right. And maybe that's what gives him the ability to think outside the box, to bridge that gap between the financial world and everyday people.
It's like he embodies that central question of our time, right?
Yeah.
How do we create a more sustainable and just world without completely upending the system?
Yeah. It's a question that a lot of leaders are struggling with.
And maybe Carney, with his background and his, kind of contradictory impulses, maybe he's the one who can find a new way forward.
Maybe he is. That's what makes all of this so fascinating. We're not just watching an election, we're watching a potential philosophical shift.
A reimagining of what leadership can look like.
Exactly. It's not just about who wins, it's about what kind of future Canada chooses.
And on that note, let's take a closer look at Carney the person. What do we know about the man behind the disaster manager image? What's his story?
Yeah, because there are a lot of surprises there, and maybe some clues about what kind of leader he'll be.
We've spent a lot of time talking about Carney as this kind of disaster manager, this technocrat, but obviously there's more to him than that. So where does he come from? What's his story?
Well, his path to politics is pretty unusual. I mean, he didn't come from a political family or anything.
Right.
He wasn't a lawyer. He started out in finance. Working for Goldman Sachs, actually.
Goldman Sachs.
I know, right? It's crazy. From the heart of global capitalism to leading a country that's trying to, find its own way.
So what do you think made him want to get into public service?
I think it's a few things.
Mm-hmm.
He's obviously ambitious.
Yeah.
Driven. But I also think he feels like he has a responsibility to use his experience to make things better.
Our sources suggest that his time at the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England really shaped his worldview.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, he saw firsthand how the 2008 crisis impacted people, the human cost of economic instability.
Right.
And maybe that made him want to be more than just a manager. Maybe he wanted to actually fix things.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And it might explain why he talks so much about ethical markets and sustainable capitalism.
Like, he's seen how the old ways of doing things can fail.
Right. And he's trying to find a new approach, one that actually works for people.
So do you think his background will help him connect with those voters who are struggling, the ones worried about making ends meet?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can he turn all that technocratic knowledge into something that actually helps people's lives?
Like, can he convince people he's not just there to help the elites?
Exactly. Because it's going to be a balancing act.
Yeah.
He's got the demands of the global economy on one side, and then on the other side, you've got Canadians who are struggling with the cost of living, worried about immigration.
Wanting a more sustainable future.
Right. It's a lot to juggle.
So it sounds like Canada's at a crossroads, and Carney's the one who has to choose the path forward. Do you think he can do it?
I think he's got the potential. He's smart, he's experienced, and he's driven. But he'll have to adapt quickly. Politics is a whole different game, and he'll need a good team to help him navigate it all.
And he'll need to earn the trust of Canadians.
Exactly. This election, it's not just about policies. It's about whether people believe in Carney. Can they trust him to be the disaster manager Canada needs right now? Or will they see him as just another politician?
Well, I guess we'll find out soon enough. The election's coming up fast, and it's going to be a huge moment for Canada. So this brings us to the end of a deep dive. We've talked about what's brought Canada to this point, the challenges they're facing, and of course, the man of the hour, Mark Carney.
It's been a really interesting conversation, and I have a feeling this is just the beginning of the story.
Yeah, there's definitely more to come. So here's a final thought for our listeners. What does Carney's rise tell us about global politics? Is this the start of a new era of technocratic leaders? Where experience and expertise are all that matter, or is he just a one-off?
It's a good question, and honestly, I don't know the answer. But I do know that the world is changing fast, and we need new leaders, new ideas, new ways of thinking.
And maybe Carney's a sign of what's to come. Maybe he's a glimpse of the future.
Maybe he is. Time will tell.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Canadian politics. We hope you learned something and that it made you think.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.